Hi, this is Paul Tyler with another episode of the Reimagine podcast. Laura, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be back, and it's great to have some familiar faces and some new ones with us today.
Yeah. And John, thank you for joining us as a co-host. We hope to do this going forward as a regular practice.
Great. Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here, and it's such an important topic of innovation. So
yeah, and I want to thank you.
Very important to many.
Yeah, I want to thank you for leading a great panel discussion on risk and managing risk in cybersecurity innovation in our event actually, Laura, 2 weeks ago, right? Innovation Retire Tech. Great turnout, and we're going to put that up. We're going to share some of those conversations right in future podcasts. Are we going to package up some of the panel discussions and share them in the next few weeks?
We are. So in the next few weeks here, be on the lookout. We're going to package each one of the panels up individually, and we're sharing information about the landing page so you can access the content as well.
Okay, great. And do you want to do the honors of introducing our guest today?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Paul. Today with us, we have Roger L. Martin, a professor of strategic management emeritus at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, where he also served as dean. In 2017, Thinkers 50 named him the world's #1 management thinker. He's published 12 books, and we're actually here today to talk with Roger about his latest book, A New Way to Think. We're going to be talking about driving innovation inside corporations as well.
Yeah, thanks. And just before we jump in, I've got to just add my personal note is I actually started my career in Cambridge, Massachusetts, under Roger's leadership of this consulting firm. So I got to see him very early on. So welcome.
It's great to be with an old colleague. I'm very proud of being one of the graduates of Monitor Company from that era. I suspect you are too. It was a good group of folks, including you.
Oh yeah, great group. I think it was a real special time. I think I joined just about the time you had your 10th anniversary, and maybe we should just sort of step back before we drive into innovation. Talk about just driving change inside corporations. Now, when I was there, you're going to please correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but the mission statement at that point was we were out to create informed choice that leads to timely action. And I think it just stuck with me. I've used it in a number of places. I'll tell you, I've stolen it. People say, Paul's smart. But
yes, you are.
Yeah. So I guess just kind of stepping back, and I think back to that era and today, I mean, changing how corporations think and behave is incredibly difficult. I guess what's the same and what's changed,
Well, on that front, I don't think much has changed, Paul. I mean, I think it still is hard to get anybody, and certainly a group of people that make up a corporation to kind of change their mind. I mean, actually, my first HBR article, while you would have been there, it was in 1993, was called "Changing the Mind of the Corporation," and it chronicled kind of some of the things I think about how you've got to produce change. I would say to anybody who wants to produce change in an organization, you really have to start where they are at. There are lots of change agents who say, I want whatever I'm trying to change to be different than it currently is. And they shoot themselves in the foot by really not understanding. The question I always want to ask is, why are things the way they are and not some other way? Unless you can answer that for an organization. And if your answer is because they're stupid, or because they're lazy, then you're going to get nowhere. You have to understand why it's sensible for them to be doing what they're doing, right? And really appreciate that. And then if you do that, if you empathize with them and appreciate it enough, they will listen to you when you say, could we do a thought experiment to say what might be another way of thinking about what you do, how you do what you do in a way that would produce better results? Now, if the results are great right now, good luck, right? Your only friend in bringing about change is if you can point to something that they are unhappy with. So however they're doing what they're doing, produces results, and they wish they were otherwise, right? Then you can say, okay, I understand why you're doing what you're doing, and here's why that's producing what you're getting, and I understand you don't like what you're getting. Your sales are growing too slowly, or you're losing market share, or other people seem to be innovating, inventing things that we could have invented, but we didn't, and now we're getting behind. Something like that. You can say, well, here's how we could take the way you're thinking and modify it in these ways to get there. And on that front, it's if you put the breadcrumbs too far apart. You say we could stop doing what we're doing now and do this other thing over here, and they can't sort of see how you could go along the pathway following the breadcrumbs to there. Then it ain't going to happen either. But if you say we could head in this direction and do this kind of thing, and then if we can get that to work, we'll do this kind of thing, and then this kind of thing, and then we'll get to a destination. So that would be my quick and dirty on how do you get somebody to change, and that has not changed in the I guess the 30 years since I wrote that HBR article.
Wow. Roger, that's very interesting the way you put that in terms of not putting the crumbs too far apart, because it makes sense to me based upon what I've seen in terms of resistance to change and difficulty of leading change. And I naturally, I don't mean as sort of a gift, but in terms of kind of who I am, is tend to think about change, and I go like, okay, I got it. You should be getting it too, the same way I get it. And that's not the case. And I think that point that you had there is to talk about the change experiment is kind of an interesting way. I haven't heard that phrase, but that's a great way of sort of saying, okay, it's an experiment. And you're offering, I think what I heard you say was the opportunity to say, if it doesn't work, we can go back.
Yes.
We're not too far out there, so we can go back. Or if it does work, just think we can keep going.
Absolutely.
And
that's what I use. And that's what I use, John. John and I, before the show, talked, compared notes. We were both academic administrators, and I was a dean of a business school, and it was, and for what it's worth, it was a transformation. I was dean for 15 years, and you know, the book on it was the Rotman School, totally transformed in those 15 years. But I always joke that I didn't actually make any changes. I just ran experiments. And so I learned early on, don't go to faculty council and say, I want to change this. And John's laughing. The minute I say faculty council, he starts laughing. I didn't go to faculty council and say, I would like to change this into this. I want to make this fundamental change to the program, or I want to create a new program. I would say, I'd like to run an experiment. I'd like to try this. Can we try it? And I'll give you an example. So I had the idea of, in second year, we had a fall semester and a spring semester, and you took 6 courses in each semester. And I said I would love to put a mini semester in the start of January when they come back from the holiday break, 2 week, where you take one intensive course, and we just move ahead. The second semester start mid-January rather than the start. And like a whole bunch of professors said, "Oh, that'll never work. People can't learn that way." Blah 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 blah. Okay. So I just said, can we just do an experiment? Let's just try it, one year. And then I went and they said, "Oh yeah, that's no big decision, just to try something." And then I went to the very best professors who I felt I could get on board to say, just try it once, teach a course in this 2-week format. And I supported them. I gave them a little money to redesign their course, and I hyped with the students. And sure enough, it was a smash hit. And so I went back to faculty council and said, "Can we do this again next year?" "Sure." "Can we do this again next year?" And then in due course, I said, "We've been doing this for so long now. We should probably actually write this into the sort of the constitution of the school. And they're, yeah, like what, we've been doing this for forever, of course. So that was my trick, right? Which is don't ever change anything. Just run experiments. You like that, Paul?
I love it. Well, and it's interesting when you say, just to carry on with the breadcrumbs analogy of the experiment. We're in the insurance space, and Roger, I know you've done work here.
Mm-hmm.
We're just ground in data,
Yes.
and well, show me the data, show me the numbers. You have a section. I almost would have created a chapter in your book called, identifying the innovation traps. And you have a great section talking about a company that said, boy, research and development is really critical for us. But why aren't results, why aren't we getting the results we should? And they tried a little harder. Can you kind of just tell that story and what your learning was in that industry?
Sure. Well, I mean, the challenge, the real challenge in innovation, I think is sort of twofold. One has to do with data, as you say, and the tricky thing about data, even though everybody is so excited about data these days, and you would know, Paul, from my reputation back in Monitor, I was a data hound just like everybody else there. But the real problem with data is the idea that all data is from the past, right? As at the time you're analyzing, right? So you're analyzing on Tuesday afternoon at 5, right? All data that you could possibly use has to be from the past, otherwise you can't analyze it, right? So the thing about that is if you kind of remember your statistics 101 course, your stats professor would have said, well, if you want to analyze data as a sample from the universe in order to be able to draw some inference about what's going on here, that sample has to be representative, right? The first thing they teach you. You can't say, we want to figure out what people want in their electric vehicle and then ask a bunch of guys, or ask a bunch of ladies, or ask a bunch of young people, or ask a bunch of old people and say that, because that's not representative of the universe. You've got to ask a representative sample of young and old, male and female people. Okay, so the only way that data, right, can be representative of the universe in which you're trying to figure out something is if the future is identical to the past. Because otherwise your data set, right, is not representative, and your statistics professor would tell you it is dangerous to make any inference whatsoever from that data. So whenever we have analysis, right, and we make a decision based on analysis, the implicit assumption we're making is the future is identical to the past. Now, I don't know about you three, but like I've had this experience where the future keeps being different.
Definitely.
Like, I don't know about you guys, but like, have you found this too, that the future, like in the world of business, it like tends to be different, right? New companies show up with new products, and those damn customers seem to want different stuff, right? And so the assumption that the future is identical to the past is not a particularly good one. And so if you do data analytics to make decisions about the future, one, you're going to be wrong, right? And two, there's this other problem pointed out by this really smart, one of the greatest American philosophers of all time, Charles Sanders Peirce, pointed out that no new idea in the history of the world has been proven in advance analytically. So when you kind of think about that, think about how many times, I'm sure each of the three of you has had this experience. You've come up with something innovative that you need permission to do, like you're not in the position to sort of green light it, and you go to the person who has your boss who can green light this. and say, listen, and Laura says, listen, I've come up with this awesome idea. It's really transformative. I think it's going to be awesome. And Laura's supervisor says, well, Laura, that sounds very, very interesting, very promising. But what I need you to do is go back and get enough data to prove that this will work, and then we'll give you the $100 million you're asking for, and you need to do this. And that supervisor actually thinks he or she is just asking a completely reasonable thing. Laura, just go do the work you should have done in the first place here to have the data. He or she is not understanding that he or she is asking Laura to do something that no human being has ever done in the history of the planet. And so Laura either goes back to her office, pulls a bottle of vodka out and starts drinking heavily, mm-hmm. or shaves back the innovativeness of her idea so that it's just barely different than what we're doing today. And she can get lots of data to support that that's a good idea because it's what we're doing today, right? And then she goes back and gets approval for it. But then then her boss is like complaining to other people, our R&D department, Laura, she just keeps coming up with these little ideas. Like there's just they're nothing. They're just little ideas. If we could only be really innovative, right? So they have no idea that they've destroyed innovation by asking the question, prove it.
Right.
Prove it. Prove it is the enemy of innovation.
And Laura, you did massive amounts of client research before you launched TEDx Hartford, right?
Absolutely not. No, it's interesting, right? Because you talk about data and how you can't, we can't see into the future. Well, I can't see into the future. Who knows? Maybe someone out there can. But it begs to ask the question, should we be listening differently? If we want to listen just to data and have data be the thing to tell us that these innovative ideas are the right ideas because we can prove them, yet if we can't prove them because there is no data, should we be asking different questions or listening in a different way?
I would say both, Laura. I think you're bang on. So what we should be doing is, one is imagining. So the only way you're going to create something new is to imagine a possibility. So how do you imagine a possibility? Does it come from nowhere? No, it comes from thinking about your experiences in a different way. So if you think about data, right? And the modern ways we crunch data, right? To be able to crunch data, right? You've got to flatten data down to one element, right? So that you can add them up and figure out means and modes and standard deviations and the like. So part of the answer to your question and your supposition, Laura, is thinking about the data that we see in a different way. Saying rather than asking that customer rate this from 1 to 10, right? And so all you get out of them is 7. Mm-hmm. That's it. Rather, think about everything that they said to you. That's the whole picture that they gave you, all the nuances, the words they used to describe something. Now, what's the problem with that? You can't add that up, right? And because it's different than what the next person said and the next person said. But it's listening with an ear to, I need to understand everything that they said and make some sense of it, even if I can't quantitatively add up what they've said. And the other, so that's listening differently, listening to come away with an entire gestalt of that conversation rather than the one variable that I'm going to pull out of that. Then the other thing to do is to be watching for things that are analogous, right? And the philosopher who I care most about of any, Aristotle, said this metaphor is the most important thinking skill you can have. So how many times, right, can you trace an innovation back to, well, they did this thing over here in this other industry, and I think it can be applied over here. It's like Johnny Ive saying, the Savoy Camera Company back in the 60s said, cameras are boring. They're dark brown or black. How's about we make them in colors like tangerine and aquamarine and the like? And they were super successful. Totally frame breaking. That's cameras. Johnny Ive, I'm a computer guy. But computers are kind of the same way. They're all dull gray, kind of like they fade into the background. They're nothing. What if we made tangerine and aquamarine and grape colored computers, right? So did he have data in the classical sense of data for that, right? Many examples in the computer industry of using colors, a statistically significant sample. No, he had zero. And in fact, it was one data point from another industry. But was it completely irrelevant? Well, no, it was a product that consumers use, a product that they're used to having look really dull and boring, that when the camera company kind of upset the apple cart and created something new, there was this that people glommed onto it and thought it was the coolest thing. So he used that to analogize to, we could do this. And that's the origin of the iMac. Did the iMac come and that Pantones, he used that. The cool thing to this story to me is that he used precisely the Pantones, right? The exact precise Pantones. So even though this was the most innovative, computer kind of visually that you've ever seen, in one way, it wasn't innovative at all, right? So I think innovation, comes from a few forms. One is this depth of understanding of fewer data points, kind of using metaphor. And the other thing I think about innovation is that the enemy of innovation is means, medians, and modes. Right? And this is what's problematic about data analysis. People say, oh, shouldn't you analyze all the data and do all this imagination stuff, Roger? Right? People always tell me that. I say, yes and no. The real danger is the minute that you analyze data, kind of where is your mind drawn to, right? It's the regression line, right? Yeah. Right? It draws you to the mean. It draws you to the regression line. It draws you to the center of the distribution. What fades in your mind, right? The outliers. Because they're in some sense problematic. They give you a higher standard deviation, a lower R squared, right? All of those things, they're bad. I think it's from the outliers that you learn strange, odd things that can help you innovate. I mean, that's how we got personal computers, right? Personal computers were crappy little powerless kind of things, right? That's what they were. They were slow, no power, fragile, all of these things. But who wanted them? The average person? No. Hackers. Mm-hmm. People at the very fringes of the use of computers who said, I don't care about that. I am not lining up at the IT department to have them decide when to put my program into their compiler. I want my own keyboard that enters things into my computer. And even if it's a sucky little thing with no power or anything, I'm going to do it. They were the outliers. They were the extremists. You had to avert your eyes to the mean and median to find that thing. And it turns out, right, that there were more people when exposed to that said, oh, I like that too, but would have never in a million years told you I like that. because they would have said, nah, no, I'm fine. I'll line up with the IT department and have them run my program when they feel like it, or I will wait 10 years for them to develop the software that I've been asking them to do because it's on there. But then when they said, oh, these little boxes actually work. And sure enough, in due course, they became the new regression line PC users, because that was everybody. It was the regression. It wasn't at the start. So think analogy, think depth rather than breadth in data, and stay away from the median if you want to innovate.
Roger, that's very interesting because as a human, I think we all have a tendency to want to stay in the safe space. And that's why I think we go to the regression line, because we go, well, it's safe there. I can't get in too much trouble if I stay right on this line or closely to it, because then I'm not going to do that.
I won't get fired for buying IBM. That's exactly it.
Exactly. And it's interesting because I think in the insurance space that I have spent a lot of time with from a financial perspective and from an operational perspective was trying to get changes. People say, well, your data is not credible. You don't have enough data points to support this. And so I went back like sulking and sort of saying, how am I going to get more data or whatever? But I think it all goes back also to your original point about, don't move the crumbs too far apart and say, yeah, but we got this outlier here, which is pretty interesting. And it makes sense to listen to and look at the outlier, because that probably represents if we look at it from an insurance or a risk standpoint, it's an outlying risk, but it has a low frequency, but it has a tremendous impact.
Yes.
If we get a hit in that risk area. And so let's understand that, because it could have a knockout punch, and everyone say, yeah, but we're on the regression line, so we're safe here. Well, you may be safe for a few minutes, but in a rapidly changing world, like you say, if the future is different than the past, you're pretty vulnerable if you don't start to look at some of those outliers. So I think that's a very interesting perspective. My personal experience was to sort of just feel badly, look at my shoes and go back to my office and say, change will never happen. But maybe it's like how I presented that, my idea was more, I set myself up to be turned away because I wasn't helping the decision makers look at the world differently.
Right, and that I think you put your finger on an important challenge, and that's where I really think in the innovation world, this idea that's typically attributed to my friend David Kelly and my now late friend Bill Margridge at IDEO of the rapid iterative prototyping. It makes sense, right? Like Aristotle, if he was around today, would say, "Good idea," because if you think about it, the time the following way, which is that the real data problem of the next 6 months, right, is that we have no data about it, right? Because it's the future, so we have no data. That's a real data problem. What's the great thing from a data standpoint about the next 6 months? Well, it's in 6 months we'll have lots of data about it, right? We'll turn around, look backwards, and there's just oodles and oodles of data. So the way to place the breadcrumbs close enough together to encourage people to go with you is to run low-res experiments that don't cost ridiculous amounts of money, to say, here's what I think will happen if we do this. So you're being like Babe Ruth, or we like Babe Ruth because he pointed to center field and then hit it out, right? Lots of baseball players hit home runs. They didn't point to center field and then hit it over where they pointed. So you say, here's what I think is going to happen. Let me try this. And then at the end of 6 months, you do have data, right, on what you've just tried. And if it's consistent with what you predicted, like Babe Ruth, they'll say, well, that's John, my boy, that's pretty interesting. You said that was going to happen, and it happened. And then you can say, can we now up it? do 10x, a bigger, higher resolution experiment, and here's what I think will happen if we do that, and do that for another 6 months, right? And then then if you're once again, we're more right than wrong, your credibility builds, and they will go with you. So that's why I think a great intervention, innovative interventionist is one who figures out how to do that and spends as much time thinking about how to make that happen. And again, if I go back to the Rotman School, right, I was dean for 15 years. My explicit plan, and you can ask people who I told it to going in, is this is kind of a crappy business school, and I want it to become Canada's greatest business school and the only Canadian business school that's globally consequential. That'll mean it has to be totally transformed. But I want to do that so slowly and in a measured way that nobody's going to freak out and jump off the bus in the first year, second year, third year, fourth year. And people expected me as a business guy coming from the outside. I was going to fire everybody and reorganize and all that kind of stuff. And I stunned and everybody. I did none of that, right? No reorganization, no mass firings of people, no pronouncements about how we're going to do everything different, no nothing. But we marched on a path where we changed some things every year, and 15 years later, it was unrecognizable from where we started. Unrecognizable, right? We climbed from nowhere to third ranked in the world, behind only Harvard and Wharton in research, for example. We were 3 times the size we were. We had a different curriculum. We had 15 times as much executive education. We were now half international rather than 5% international. I mean, it was unrecognizable, but there was not a year-to-year difference that freaked anybody out. And so that's what you got to do if you're going to innovate. Breadcrumbs, close together, not far apart, and predict, then gather data and show that you were thinking more soundly than not, even if people thought you're nuts, which many people did think I was nuts.
Yeah, change without being changed. It's interesting. Now, John and I talked about this a little bit the other day, but Roger, just kind of connecting the dot between Apple and insurance. You think about the insurance business, I should theoretically be able to offer you cheaper rates than John if I know that you exercise, you're going to live longer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, studies say if I take 1,000 steps, 10,000 steps a day, that perhaps I will be healthier. Now, if I go back to John and his regulatory world and I say, John, I want to put this product on the shelf. I want to give discounts to Roger if he wears this watch and he does this following for a certain period of time. What are you going to say, John? What are you going to say to me?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to say no, because you don't have enough data to support that decision. And I want it to be absolutely certain that if John wears that watch, he's not going to die. And wouldn't that be a fun world if that's all it took to stay alive, was to wear a Fitbit. But I think that's exactly right, Paul. That's exactly the discussion we were having.
Now, what I'd love to have people on from Hancock, because Roger, they did that. Now I don't know if they just, somebody said, let's do an experiment and give away an Apple Watch with a life insurance policy, but they kind of made this work, at least for me, from the outside.
I bet they took small steps. Is my bet, right? I bet they gave it out to 1,000 customers and observed what was happening. I mean, and in life insurance, it's trickier. The timeframes are longer, so getting results can take longer. But I suspect they did, and it's all. And this, you pointed out, I have a chapter in the book on this. It's when you're designing something innovative, designing the intervention that will cause the change is as important as the quality of the change itself. And most innovators are really uninterested in designing of the intervention. They're into designing the artifact. And the success we had at the Rotman School, for example, was had as much to do with the design of the intervention as it did the design of the artifact, right? And my example earlier of that mini term, right? Mini term is an awesome innovation. Students love it. It's like, kind of constantly, massively subscribed to this day, and I've been long gone. There's not a chance in the world that anybody would get rid of it. It's there because of the intervention design, because it wouldn't have been if I'd have gone to faculty council and asked for a change in our policy to make 3 terms rather than 2 terms in the second year. It just wouldn't have happened. Flat out wouldn't have happened.
Well, Paul, I have to tell you, when I was in a regulatory role, your example company that you gave was an absolute, when their filing request would come in, everyone would roll their eyes. Here they go again. It's another one of these things that's based on something. It's a slice versus having this massive study that said it moved, but nothing ever. Everyone likes that safety because of it, and nobody's going to go insolvent as long as everyone stays the path, and that's not necessarily true. But it's a very good point. Roger, Paul and I had a great conversation about things, and one of the things we see, Paul and I agreed upon also, was this issue of the perspective of change from the shareholder perspective to the stakeholder perspective, where you bring in a much broader set of perspectives of people or organizations that are impacted by the change. And we've had our share of, and I've seen my share of saying, yeah, but the shareholders won't go for it, so we're not going to do it. Or if we just stay the course because that's what they expect us to do if we don't want to get too far away. What's your perspective on sort of that shareholder versus stakeholder perspective with respect to facilitating innovation and change?
Sure. Well, I am sort of fascinated / perplexed at the degree to which CEOs think lots of things are changeable, right? So we could offer different products or services. We could have a different distribution channel. We could target different customers, right? But our shareholders are our shareholders. And I'm sort of like, why? Right? Like, why are they sort of, kind of, it's sort of like, is this like the tablets, Moses and the tablets, like they were given to you, and that's what you have. Like, why aren't they a variable too? And why can't we say, in order to do this strategy, to pursue this strategy, what shareholders do we need for that, right? And then get those shareholders, rather than take shareholders who don't want you to do what you're doing, and somehow try to convince them. Right? And that's what Paul Pullman did, right? When he took over Unilever, he said, here's the deal. The problem with Unilever and why our shareholder returns are so crummy is we've been underinvesting in our brands, underinvesting in innovation, and the world is becoming more environmentally conscious, and we're showing no interest in that whatsoever. So here's the deal. We are going to invest in our brands, much more brand building. We're going to invest way more in innovation, and we're going to be ahead of everybody else in our sector on environmental sustainability. And here's the deal. If you don't like that as a shareholder, do me a big favor, sell your stock. That's what he did. And it wasn't much more subtle than that. Maybe I've heard it up. And of course, I'm sure his IR people were like apoplectic, and life as we know it on the planet is going to end because you just said those words, Paul. the stock traded down a little bit. I think it went down as much as 7%, but was back up above its current level within 6 months. And what Paul did was go around the world for 2 years, visiting with long-holding pension funds, family offices who were interested in that as a strategy, right? So that he transformed his shareholder base into a shareholder base that actually was completely aligned with what he wanted to do. And when 3G, right, the Brazilian PE guys who had done Kraft Heinz, and Kraft Heinz was already starting to not look so great, and so they, if something is not looking great, you try to create a distraction. So they try to take over Unilever, and every single 3G takeover initiative until that point in time had been successful, because they'd go to shareholders and say, those morons running your company are doing a bad job. Here's what we're going to do to fix it. And they went to the shareholders and said, these morons are caring about sustainability and brand building and investing in R&D, and we're never going to make any money doing that. We've got to cut costs. And the shareholders said, could you shut up and get out of my face? And they gave up in a couple of months, gave up completely because they got no traction. Why? Because Paul had viewed shareholders as a variable that you must choose, just like you choose what segments you're, industrial sectors you're in, what segments of those you're playing, and how you're going to win. And I wish more CEOs did that. Is just not view their shareholders as fixed, as this boogeyman who's there. They're fixed, and it's their way. Because again, shareholders, in the modern world, right? Who are shareholders anyway, right? Are they people who provide you with capital? No, right? No, they're for starters, right? If you ask the question, what is the value of new capital raised on the NYSE every year compared to trading on the NYSE every year? And the answer would be, I think would be 0.1% or something, right? So it's just a large casino, not a capital raising sphere. And then the question is, who are these shareholders anyway? Well, the ones that are on your register aren't the shareholders, right? It's people like CalPERS, right? It's CalPERS. Are they a shareholder? No, they're a fiduciary. It's not their money; it's pensioners' money, and they're simply an agent, a fiduciary agent for them. How about BlackRock or Fidelity? Are they actual real shareholders? No, they're not. They're fiduciaries too. And so all these supposed shareholders who it's their money and they aren't, there's like a tiny little minority now that are, for the Dow Jones 30, the top 3 investors for the Dow Jones, kind of every component of the Dow Jones 30 is BlackRock, Fidelity, and State Street. So I don't treat them with this amazing respect. So you gave us the money, otherwise we wouldn't be able to survive. And so whatever crazy ass idea you have, we're gonna dutifully follow that. It's no, you have to explain to them kind of what you're gonna do, and invite them to get the hell out if they don't like it, and invite people in who do like it.
So speaking of inviting people in, at what point of change or at what point of an idea should employees be invited in? So not just those creating the change, but the people around and supporting it.
I think early on, right, is the answer, but in correct proportion to their capabilities, right? So I'm. Some people kind of think of me as this great kind of Democrat because of some of the things I say. Not political Democrat, but sort of corporate Democrat, where everybody gets a stake and you should have everybody vote on everything. kind of no. But I am a believer that different people in the organization, by dint of where they are in the organization, have different skills and capabilities for making decisions. And if you just generally think about a corporation as some kind of a pyramid, right, which is what it is, or triangle, they just are that way. As you go up the triangle, you have a greater capacity to understand how the pieces of the entire puzzle fit together, right? Because you said the CEO is the greatest. He or she understands kind of how this division relates to this function relates to that, whatever. And people down below have much less capability to understand that. Because they're stupid? No, it's because they're sitting somewhere else, right, with a different set of daily experiences, right? As you go down the organization, what is the thing that those people farther down the organization know more about than the people at the top of the organization? I would argue it's what customers want, need, care about. Why? Because they hang out with them way more than the people at the top of the organization. People at the top of the organization have jobs to do other things that don't give them as much time as the people down below to figure out kind of what customers want, right? And that would be just one example, right? Another example would be, how the equipment in the plant works, right? People there know much more about that and what it can and can't do versus people at the top of the organization who are more distant. So my belief is that you should be trying to align the decisions that need to be made with the people in the best position to make those decisions. Right? So I wouldn't ask people at the bottom of the corporation, what industrial sector should we be in? I wouldn't, because I don't think they know. But if I'm saying in the widget business, how should we really kind of win with customers, and what are customers really interested in? I wouldn't ask the CEO to answer that question. And I probably wouldn't even ask the head of the widget business to answer that question. I'd ask somebody who goes and works with those customers all the time, sells to them, does service for them, and whatever. And so the best strategies, I think, come from taking the best and most out of everybody in the organization and figuring out how to help all of them make decisions together in ways that take into account kind of the lives and their jobs that give them more or less access to this versus that sort of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, Roger, the intervention, the importance of the intervention. It's kind of my head connects with the people and where your discussion is going right now. Insurance industry, at least from my experience, it's one, Roger. It's a pyramid, but it's a steep one, because we have so many different, very narrow pieces of the business that it takes years to learn at this point. And who can actually connect them at the top? Frequently, CEOs don't know it. They came from one division. They're learning how kind of all the pieces get together. Now, throw COVID on top of this. It's a really interesting time for a business. We have pressures. Everybody's doing a digitization strategy. They're all looking at new products. How do you go to market with consumers? I had dinner the other night with Dave Levinson, who runs LIMRA. He's CEO of our industry association. He said, Paul, the industry has hired so many new people into the businesses, but into their companies today. But because everything is working remote, they're coming in new. They just don't have any. It's hard for them to kind of get grounded in not only the company but the business. How do you do an intervention? And how do you design a successful innovation for change, which is compelling? I think a lot of people in our industry knows it. When, boy, you've got a lot. There's the inertia towards disconnection is so high.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's whenever you have diversity, right? Something that you can identify as diversity. In this case, it's a form of diversity, right? People steeped in industry knowledge and new people who aren't coming in. I mean, your task as a leader is to figure out how to make the most of rather than the least of that, right? Right. The way to make the least of it is what most companies do, to say, this is the way we think around here, and you diverse people, please shut up, right? That's the way to make the least of it. Great leaders, I think, make the most of it. And I think they would be sitting down the people who have lots of industry experience with the people who have none, to say, we got to make some decisions here. And I would love the people who have deep experience in the industry to say, here's the way they're thinking about it. And then all you people who have not got any experience in the industry, take your experience from the other industries and say, what questions arise in your mind where you say, well, I can understand how that works there, but I kind of wonder about this or that, and surface the questions that come from the diversity of inexperienced and out have, and then just tackle those questions. But the key to me is really, inviting in a constructive way that those other perspectives, rather than stifling them. Or would I start the meeting saying, okay, all you people who aren't in the industry and are just new to the company, could you tell us how to run this? But that would be like a dumb way to start, right? Because they have no context for giving their thoughts and opinions. In some sense, you need to give them the fabric of, well, here's how we're thinking about it from the inside. Help us think better. So designing that is, I think, is key to it being productive and successful.
Oh, this is great, Roger. I know we're almost at the top of the hour here. John, any final thoughts or questions for Roger?
Well, I mean, Roger, this has been just amazing, and I think I have about 22 questions left. But I mean, and I didn't start out with that many when I began listening to you, and it's been very interesting to hear you kind of turn over a lot of rocks, and I think there's a great opportunity here with in terms of hearing your comments in terms of innovation and facilitating change that provide a lot of guidance and wisdom for that, which doesn't necessarily correlate with the way things have been done in the past or the way that many organizations are proceeding today. But I mean, in terms of some of this has been very interesting. I just have one question I will ask, kind of building on Laura's question about bringing people in. And if you bring it in and you do those right things, like you said about, giving people context about what we're thinking about and then soliciting their change. There's a lot of emphasis today on diversity, equity, inclusion within organizations and making our organizations more diverse, more equitable, and include people in different perspectives. I think I know the answer, you would say, but what do you see as being an tool or an energizer for facilitating innovation or change?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky and super important question, and I have probably what may be a slightly controversial view on this, and that is that I do not think many corporations are equipped to productively handle diversity. So diversity is going to be a tricky thing. It's super important, right? And we've got to do better on DEI and the D part of that, for sure. But here's the problem. The problem is people in corporations and corporations themselves have not been taught the fundamental tools and techniques for taking advantage of diversity. Right? So if you just think about how you've been taught, let's say you've got a business education, right? In that business education, you are you are immediately divided into silos. Laura, you're now in a marketing course, so we're going to talk about marketing. And if you raise anything about HR, we're going to say, Laura, could you just ask that to your HR professor, please? This is marketing, right? And then we walk you across the hallway to your next course, which is accounting, and you ask, what about this marketing aspect of it? No, don't talk about it. So you are taught to think narrowly in silos, right? Where there's a way of thinking that's appropriate to that silo, and any other way of thinking and any other conflict with that, you are taught that's somebody else's problem. That's certainly not mine, and I'm not going to help you with it. That's the biggest weakness of business education. It siloizes everything and teaches you to stick with one essentially philosophy for thinking about that. Instead of business education, when Laura says, yes, but what you're teaching me now in HR is inconsistent with what I was taught in operations. I just came out of my OR course across the hallway. It was last hour, and you're telling me something different, right? What we need to be teaching Laura is, here's the technique for understanding what I'm teaching you in HR, breaking that down to the logical structure, and doing the same for OR. And then here's a technique for being able to say, how could I integrate those two into a better perspective? Okay? Because Laura doesn't have that, because she wasn't taught it, and she was implicitly taught, don't do that, right? By being slapped down every time she asks a question across it. She comes out into the business world as a person who essentially views a diverse perspective in business. She might not in her home life or in her social life, but in business, she's been taught a diverse perspective is a bad and dangerous thing. It just creates a problem, right? That's unfortunately what we have as the culture of the corporation now. And it's not because there are bad people in them. Those people go and act in more diverse ways outside, but inside they don't. And so I think right now, adding to the diversity of corporations isn't making them better. That's my controversial view. It should, right? In fact, it can be a monumental, game-changing strength, but only if we know how to make the most of it, right? Typically, when there are conflicting opinions in the corporate setting, right, the answer is to figure out which is superior, right, and dismiss the other point of view and double down on the one that's superior. So you get no value whatsoever from diversity. If instead we had in a corporation the natural reaction to, Roger thinks X and Laura thinks not X, for Roger to say, not X, what the hell is Laura seeing that I'm not? I better go and ask Laura, okay, tell me more about not X. What you think? Oh, you think consumers do that? You've seen consumers who do that, and the distribution channel cares about. Interesting. I've not seen that. And because I'm listening so much to Laura says to me, but Roger, you said X. What are you seeing that I'm not? I'm not seeing. We explore each other's point of view, and then we come up with hey. If we combine a little bit of that with a little bit of that in this new and interesting way, man, would that be killer? Then what we come away from the meeting saying is what? My biggest, best friend and enabler is what? Diversity. That's where we got to get to. And that's why, for sake of argument, that's why for the 15 years I was dean at the Rotman School, I made integrative thinking one of our key thrusts, to teach the Lauras and the Rogers how to say diversity is such a benefit. It's an opportunity you should seize, jump in with both feet, seize it. And here's the thinking methodology for doing that. So it's a big and complicated question, John, but I think there's a thinking infrastructure that we have to put in place, and it ain't diversity training. That's for darn sure.
Interesting.
It just isn't. That is not solving. That is not solving the problem. It's a thinking style that is the important thing, and it's missing. Flat out.
Thanks for sure, Laura.
Yeah, and so that actually that hit on a few different levels. In high school, when I graduated senior year, my superlative was teacher's worst nightmare, and it wasn't because I acted out; it was because I asked too many questions.
Yeah.
So for me,
bad girl. Laura.
Too many questions. I had to see the world a different way. But I'm going to follow up with probably either a question that's going to be easy to answer or slightly more difficult. It's up to you. What is your why? Why do you do this? You've done a lot, but what is it that motivates you day after day?
I guess I have an instinct for trying to help people, and I just hate to see people bogged down by ways of thinking that don't get them what they want. I try to be fairly agnostic on trying to suggest what they should want. But when they want something and they're thinking about it in a way that doesn't get them there, it just makes me sad. And so I try to offer people better ways to think about what they're thinking about, so that they get farther in a direction that they can. And when they do, and get back to me to say, hey, Roger, that way you gave me to think about this enabled me to have this breakthrough or that makes my day or week or month. So that's the why.
Hey, well, thanks so much, Roger Martin. Thanks for joining us. We will put a link to your book in our show notes for any listeners who want to make it, buy it easily. How should people? What's the best way for people to stay in touch with your work, your thinking? I know you're a regular contributor to HBR. How else?
Well, I've organized. I've written, as you know, a lot. This is book 13, and I've probably written 700 or 800 articles. I've tried to organize them in a user-friendly way on my website. So if you want to see any of my work, my readings, it is www.rogerlmartin.com. Now, don't do rogermartin.com, or you will get a real estate broker in Houston who is an extremely nice man, and he sends me all these emails and everything back, and he's so dutiful about it. And I send him all my books. He likes my books, and so we're friends. But I do not want to make his life more miserable. So remember, my middle name is Lloyd, so it's rogerlmartin.com, and then Twitter, I'm at rogerlmartin. And you would like this, Paul. If you haven't seen this, I have, for the past 89 weeks and counting, Monday I guess will be 90th, put out a piece on Medium in a series I call the Playing to Win Practitioner Insight series. So it's a 1,500 to 2,000 word piece on some aspect of how to practically do strategy. And so if anybody's a medium person, all they have to do is type in my name or Playing to Win, their tag to that, and they'll get access to all of those pieces in the series. Those would be the ways.
Okay, terrific. Okay, we'll put those. We'll put them in the links. John, thank you. Laura, thanks. And want to thank all our listeners. Give us your feedback and join us again next week for another episode of the Rematch Podcast. Thanks.